On July 31, 1945, in the murky depths of Singapore Harbour, the British submarine Z3 nestled carefully beneath the hull of the Japanese heavy cruiser Takao. Leading seaman James McGuinness entered the cramped, wet and dry chamber of the vessel, preparing to plant 6 limpet mines on Takao's hull. He took a deep breath and tried to push the hatch open. But with the cruiser's massive bulk looming just inches above, the hatch would not fully give way. In a desperate act of ingenuity, McGuinness deflated his aqualungs air sac to squeeze through the half-open hatch. Contorting his body, he finally slipped through the narrow gap. Takao's hull was covered in a forest of barnacles and marine growth, making it nearly impossible to attach the mines. With no other choice, McGuinness scraped at the cruiser's bottom until his hands were raw and bleeding before finally securing the first charge. But with 5 more to go, every passing second heightened the risk of detection. In the early months of 1945, despite major Allied advances across the Pacific, key Japanese strongholds remained, including the heavily fortified naval base at Singapore, once a jewel of the British Empire and strategically vital to the region. Singapore had become a formidable bastion. Naval assault was nearly impossible due to its geography and defenses, while air attack was too risky because of extensive anti-aircraft cover. Recently strengthened by the arrival of the heavy cruiser Takao, launched in 1930 as the lead ship of her class, Takao had been at the forefront of Japanese naval operations. Her 10 8-inch guns, 8 5-inch guns, and powerful anti-aircraft batteries had supported invasions of the Philippines and the Moluccas, devastated Allied shipping in the Dutch East Indies, and fought fiercely at the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, where she helped bring down USS Hornet before pounding USS South Dakota at Guadalcanal. But in 1944, while en route to the Battle of Leyte Gulf, Takao was struck by 2 torpedoes from USS Data, which shattered to shafts, broke her fantail, and flooded 3 boiler rooms. The damage forced her to retreat to Singapore. Repairs would have required towing her back to Japan, which was impossible at the time. Instead, the Japanese employed her as a floating anti-aircraft battery, guarding Singapore alongside the similarly damaged heavy cruiser Miyako. Both ships posed a major threat to any Allied air raid. If the Allies were to reclaim Singapore, Takao and Miyako had to be neutralized. The Royal Navy turned to a new weapon, the XE-class submarines, known as X-craft, built in 1944. These 12 miniature submarines were only 51 feet long and designed to penetrate enemy harbors. They carried 2 side charges, each loaded with 2 tons of explosive, and 6 20-pound limpet mines for divers to attach to enemy hulls. Their predecessors, the X-class, had already been used in 1943 during Operation Source to cripple the German battleship Tirpitz in Norway. With the war in Europe drawing to a close, the Z-class was reassigned to the Pacific, too small to make long voyages alone. They were transported to Borneo aboard the depot ship HMS Bonaventure, which reached Labuan in July 1945. XE-4 and XE-5 were dispatched to sever undersea cables, linking Japanese forces in Hong Kong with Saigon, while XE-3 was tasked with the far more dangerous mission against Takao in Singapore Harbour. Command of XE-3 fell to 25-year-old Lieutenant Ian Edward Fraser, already a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross for helping sink the German U-boat U-301 while serving on HMS Sahib. His crew included Sub-Lieutenant William James Lanyon Smith at the controls, engine room artificer Charles Alfred Reed as engineer, and leading seaman James Joseph McGuinness as diver. McGuinness was an experienced veteran of X-craft missions, having already taken part in Operation Source, where he earned a mention in dispatches for bravery. Their mission was to slip through Singapore's formidable defenses, plant explosives on Takao, while XE-1 did the same to Miyako, and render both ships permanently out of action. On July 26, 1945, the 2 X-craft began their perilous journey from Labuan, towed by the submarines HMS Spark and HMS Stygian, which would release them near their targets. Conditions were brutal. The cramped craft were not built for long voyages, forcing the crew to endure sweltering heat, foul air, and the constant threat of discovery. As they drew closer to Singapore, the dangers multiplied. Hydrophones, minefields, patrol boats, and anti-submarine nets all stood between them and their prey. On July 30th, Spark and Stygian released XE-1 and XE-3 about 40 miles from the entrance to Singapore Harbour. From that point forward, the submarines were on their own, left to carry out the mission on which so much depended. Their survival depended entirely on skill, courage, and a considerable amount of luck. As night fell over Singapore, XE-3 began her final approach. Lieutenant Fraser, perched in the conning position, guided the tiny submarine through treacherous waters. He deliberately avoided the marked channel and instead steered into a known minefield, gambling his crew's lives to evade Japanese hydrophone listening posts. The coast of Johor slipped by in the darkness. Just before dawn, they reached the Singapore Straits. Fraser strained through his binoculars, scanning the horizon. When a massive shape loomed ahead, could only be an enemy convoy. He dropped through the hatch in a flash and ordered an emergency dive. As XE-3 sank, a terrifying clank echoed through the hull. Another metallic thud confirmed their worst fear. The submarine was sitting directly on top of a mine. Hearts pounded as the crew listened to the thunder of propellers above, the low thrum of tankers mixing with the sharp whine of escort vessels. Minutes stretched like hours until the sounds finally faded. Fraser gave the order to blow the tanks, and by some miracle, XE-3 rose free without detonating the mine. They pressed on, approaching the anti-submarine net guarding the harbour. At 10:30 a.m., Fraser spotted the tender attending the net, and ordered McGuinness to prepare to cut through if necessary. Fortune favoured them, the net lay open, and XE-3 slipped past like a ghost. The harbour narrowed, crowded with small craft. Every man was focused. Fraser searched for the target. Smith monitored depth. Reed steered carefully, and McGuinness waited, knowing his greatest challenge was yet to come. At last, they found Takao, the floating giant they had come to destroy. A Liberty launch full of sailors pulled away from the cruiser, as Fraser checked his watch to a clock. It was time. XE-3 crept towards the cruiser's massive hull, when a sickening crunch reverberated through the submarine. They had wedged themselves between Takao's hull and the seabed. For 40 agonizing minutes, Fraser struggled to maneuver into position. Finally, McGuinness prepared to exit, but when he tried to open the hatch, he saw the cruiser's hull so close that it opened only halfway. Thinking quickly, he deflated his aqualung and forced his way through the narrow gap. Outside, another nightmare awaited. Takao's hull was overgrown with barnacles and thick marine growth. For half an hour, McGuinness scraped and clawed at the surface until his hands bled, every movement threatening to betray him. Inside the submarine, the crew sat in suffocating silence as minutes dragged into eternity. At last, McGuinness returned, exhausted, his breathing gear leaking, but triumph in his eyes. 6 limpet mines now clung to Takao's hull, spread across 45 feet, each one a promise of destruction. As the escape chamber drained, Fraser ordered the release of the starboard charge and its container. The mission seemed complete, but when they tried to back away, XE-3 remained wedged beneath the cruiser. For nearly an hour, they fought desperately, flooding and blowing tanks, switching between full ahead and full astern, even rocking the submarine to break free while the clock on their explosives ticked down. Suddenly, without warning, XE-3 shot backward, lurching out of control and breaching the surface. For a heart-stopping moment, the stern broke into view, but the Japanese failed to notice. The crew quickly flooded tanks, sinking back into the relative safety of the seabed. Then came another chilling realization. The port container, now empty of explosives, was still attached to the hull. Fraser's heart sank, but before he could speak, McGuinness volunteered to go out again. Smiling faintly, he said, "I'll be all right as soon as I get my wind, sir." For 7 agonizing minutes, the crew waited. Outside, McGuinness struggled with the stuck container, his raw hands working a heavy spanner as every clang of metal seemed to echo through the harbor. At last, he returned, weary but successful. XE-3 was free. Fraser guided the submarine away from Takao, retracing their path past the nets and into open water. Every sound threatened discovery, but at last they reached their rendezvous with H. Stygian. The exhausted but elated crew climbed aboard the larger submarine. Meanwhile, Z-1's mission had faltered. Japanese patrol craft forced delays, and time slipped away. With Myoko lying frustratingly 2 miles deeper into enemy waters, Z-1's captain made a bold decision. Knowing Z-3's charges were already primed beneath Takao, he chose to strike the same target. In a daring pivot, they maneuvered alongside Takao and deployed their own explosives to amplify the destruction before slipping away to rejoin HMS Spark. Soon after, a series of violent explosions rocked Singapore Harbor. The limpet mines had detonated, causing severe damage to Takao, though she did not sink. The cruiser was crippled beyond repair, reduced to a floating hulk incapable of combat. Once a symbol of Imperial Japan's naval strength, she was surrendered to the British after the war, and later used as a target ship before being sunk in October 1946. The bravery of Fraser McGuinness and their crew did not go unrecognized. Both Fraser and McGuinness received the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military honor. Smith was awarded the Distinguished Service Order, and Reed received the Conspicuous Gallantry Medal. Operation Struggle demonstrated the power of small, specialized forces to strike directly at the heart of enemy